The annual 2 sessions here in Beijing is widely seen as a platform for China's Communist Party to legitimize its rule. Thousands of delegates from across the country attend dozens of meetings, essentially to rubber stamp the party's leadership, its achievements, and plans for the country. This year's event, though, carries greater significance as the Communist Party marks its centenary anniversary, in tandem with China's rise as a world power.
It's been more than a year since the COVID-19 pandemic first hit China, forcing a rare 2-month delay in the gathering of the country's legislature last year. This year, the sessions are back to being held during their normal schedule, though under strict COVID-19 controls. This after China declared success in controlling the pandemic within its borders. And as the global effort to ramp up vaccination gains steam, China's narrative has now shifted to its role in the global vaccination race. Officials have been keen to bring local and foreign media on tours like this to showcase the country's production of domestically produced vaccines.
Now, this is where the vaccine developed by the Beijing-based unit of Sinopharm is produced, and it claims that it will be able to manufacture 1 billion doses of the vaccine this year alone. This is even though questions remain about the domestic rollout of China's vaccination program as it continues to ship vaccines abroad as well.
But though questions abound, answers were less than forthcoming. The vaccine maker rarely straying from their talking points. China has criticized more affluent Western countries for hoarding vaccines, even as it continues to face allegations of a lack of transparency and mishandling of the pandemic in the early stages by some countries, including the US. So observers say China will use the 2 sessions to shape its narrative as it gears up to mark the 100th anniversary of China's Communist Party this July.
The meetings that are going to happen certainly primarily for domestic consumption, in the spirit of 100 years of the party. It's all about the achievements, the most recent of which is not just how China prevailed over COVID, but more than that, how China has emerged as a source of public health goods for the international community.
Dubbed vaccine diplomacy, this also comes as China deals with a new U.S. administration under President Joe Biden. China has called for a restoration of ties, which have chilled significantly under former U.S. President Donald Trump. But signs suggest that Mr. Biden will not reduce pressure on China.
I think it will be very hard for both sides to restore the relation back to the pre-Trump era. This is because the 2 countries are now competing for global economic dominance, and also the rivalry has spilled over to technology and financial spray. For the U.S.-China relation, usually it will not be mentioned explicitly in the government working report. However, I believe the Chinese government will definitely draft some industrial policy and industrial plan just to be prepared.
The Biden administration has already reminded Beijing that it intends to compete with China's growing influence and military strength in the Asia-Pacific.
This year's 2 sessions is similar to its 2020 edition, taking place under strict COVID-19 prevention measures. For the media, journalists from overseas have not been allowed in to cover proceedings, and for those of us based here, access to meeting venues has been limited as well. COVID-19 tests will also be required, and many news conferences will have to be monitored virtually.
Last year, for the first time in decades, China chose to forego setting an economic growth target due to uncertainties brought about by the pandemic. But it still saw 2.3% growth in 2020, making it the only major economy in the world to register positive growth last year. And this year, analysts say the economy could expand by 7 to 8.5%, though the Politburo, a top decision-making body of the ruling Communist Party, says China's recovery has yet to attain a solid footing.
The government working report will try to convey that China is a big economy. It will continue grow at a relatively faster growth rate. So it's quite a big market for foreign investors to continue to invest in China.
But a recovery from a low base wouldn't necessarily mean that China has returned to a high growth period. And that's why, beyond growth targets, observers will also be looking out for the country's plans for the future. A new 5-year plan will take effect from this year, and a 2035 vision has been outlined. Reports suggest a goal of the plan will be to achieve economic growth averaging around 5% per year. And China's new dual circulation strategy, depending more on its domestic market, is expected to figure strongly in the plan.
Although Chinese government tried to explain many times that the market should not interpret this growth pattern as China's inward-looking policy. However, I think we can safely assume that for certain important strategic industries and sectors, China will definitely seek higher self-reliance. For example, in technology sector, especially the integrated circuit supply, and also in food supply as well as energy supply, China will definitely seeking a higher self-reliance.
This is the new U.S. administration under President Joe Biden has signaled continued pressure on China.
A lot is going to depend on how much either party, whether Washington or Beijing, what are they prepared to bring to the table? How much are they prepared to allow to be negotiated?
The National People's Congress is also expected to consider changes to Hong Kong's electoral system. This will reinforce Beijing's ambition to have the Chinese territory run by what it calls patriots and further marginalize pro-democracy candidates.
President Xi Jinping is into the final year of his second 5-year term, but expectations are that he will continue to remain in power come next year. And to prove he is still the best person for the job, President Xi recently declared complete victory in China's fight to eradicate rural poverty.
In line with the Communist Party's 100th anniversary, China is expected to declare it has become a moderately prosperous society in the middle of this year, with poverty alleviation a key part of that effort. The goal is personal for President Xi, who made the pledge to eliminate poverty soon after taking office in 2012. China says it has lifted about 10 million people out of poverty every year in the last 8 years, with about $246 billion invested in these efforts. But some observers have questioned whether China's poverty line has been set at too low a bar. At $2.30 per day, this is slightly above the World Bank's lowest threshold of $1.90, but still lower than the benchmarks for lower and upper middle income countries. There are also those who question how sustainable these efforts are and how urban poverty can be addressed as well.
It's because the pandemic has helped China to export a lot of electronic products and medical devices. However, we have to see that in 2020, a lot of the losses in service industry and consumption sector are permanent loss. So this means if we compare our current China GDP forecast compare with our forecast before the pandemic, we will still find China's GDP will be affected negatively by the pandemic.
At the opening of its annual session, Wang Yang, chairman of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, said China will seek to consolidate the fruit of poverty alleviation in the Western region under its latest development plan for the 5 years to 2025. In an unusual move for a top Chinese leader, Mr. Wang, who is also vice premier of the State Council, explicitly addressed growing tensions between China and the U.S. as he reviewed the advisory body's work in 2020. He said the advisory body denounced in the strongest terms U.S. legislation concerning Xinjiang, Tibet, and Hong Kong, as well as anti-China bills regarding COVID-19 and the falsehoods peddled by certain U.S. politicians. The top national advisory body, headed by Mr. Wang, is made up of representatives of broader society, from businessmen to artists and non-communists. It meets in parallel with the National People's Congress, China's top legislature, in a carefully choreographed political showcase that serves as a platform for officials to push its narrative on major issues. Media conferences held on the sidelines of the two sessions are the rare occasions where senior officials, including Premier Li Keqiang, would sit down and take questions from international media on thorny issues. Even though in recent years, organizers have exerted more control over what questions will be asked at these events. At a news conference organized by the CPPCC, CNA was given the opportunity to ask spokesperson Guo Weimin about criticisms of China's vaccine rollout.
We've seen China's COVID-19 vaccines being in the spotlight, but there have also been questions from some about the transparency of the trial data and the implications that has for safety and efficacy. There have also been questions with regard to whether China is using vaccine diplomacy to prioritize shipping vaccines to other countries to gain influence instead of focusing on its own domestic rollout of its vaccine program. What is your response to this? Thank you.
你问到我们出口疫苗，我们开展疫苗合作的目的。我也注意到有人质疑中国是通过应用疫苗来扩大我们的地缘政治影响力。这种说法、想法是十分狭隘的。疫苗是防控并战胜疫情的重要手段，也是当前国际社会抗疫合作的重要内容。
He said China has actively promoted the equitable distribution of vaccines around the world, citing its efforts in supporting local companies to work with other countries in vaccine research and development and production, as well as its role in the World Health Organization's COVAX facility. According to him, as of the end of February, China has provided vaccine assistance to 69 countries and 2 international organizations and exported vaccines to 28 countries, and this number is still increasing. In the coming days, delegates will discuss the economy, national and local budgets, and the 14th five-year plan. The truncated 2 sessions will close on March 11.
As the meetings of China's political elite get underway, here in Washington, D.C., the new US President Joe Biden is preparing for his first address to a joint session of Congress. It's the most delayed speech to Congress in recent decades, as lawmakers have been wrangling over the details of his enormous $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package. In the speech, it's a chance for the new president to lay out his vision of the country as it battles the dual challenges of the pandemic and the economic fallout. And it's a platform for him to again try and unite the country after a bruising election that amplified America's political divisions. When Joe Biden makes his speech to America, steel barriers will separate him from the rest of the country. The very spot he'll be speaking from, the US Capitol, has in recent weeks been at the centre of a divided America. It was the US Capitol building that pro-Trump supporters stormed, trying to overturn the election.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear.
It was the scene of President Biden's inauguration, where rioters rampaged just weeks earlier.
Is the respondent Donald John Trump guilty or not guilty?
And it was in the capital where his predecessor, President Trump, was acquitted at his second impeachment trial. That violence and the rioting of January the 6th has left very clear marks up here on Capitol Hill. Police say they have intelligence that points to extremists planning another attack to coincide with Joe Biden's speech, which is why the security fences that were put up several weeks ago are staying for the foreseeable future. And around 5,000 National Guard troops deployed here to Washington, D.C. are still stationed here. Joe Biden may want this speech to be about turning the page, but there are very clear reminders of the hangover left by the last administration, not just here, but right across the country, where the sting of the last 12 months is still as painful as ever. For this family-owned ice cream shop in New York, the pandemic served up a difficult year. They were allowed to stay open for takeout only, and they received government stimulus money to keep them afloat. But
just because we're here right now, it doesn't necessarily give us insurance that we'll be here in a year from now.
President Biden recently outlined new rules to better protect small businesses like Petrushka's, ensuring she gets financial help before larger companies. She needs that, but she also needs assurances about schools reopening safely, something the president is prioritizing.
For my husband and I, we have 3 small children who we have not felt comfortable to send to school because if one of them gets COVID, that means either one of us has to stay home to care for them, or we also risk the possibility of getting COVID. And if one of us gets COVID, then we have to, trace and, make sure that our employees are safe. There's a whole domino effect that happens.
Stimulus is top of the president's agenda. He wants to get his $1.9 trillion recovery bill passed by Congress before he addresses it.
Your unemployment checks, they're going to continue and they're going to be larger. Every family is going to get relief. We're going to have money coming out for every child in the country. Those things are really going to be big things that he can talk about if the Congress has acted before he speaks.
The bill is expected to pass. It's a massive financial injection into a struggling economy. Activewear company Day One was inactive for much of last year. Pandemic restrictions closed down its New York factory, grinding business to a halt, and its requests for government financial assistance went unanswered.
I'm a silver linings kind of gal, and although we were shut down for months and that is a business's worst nightmare, I like to think that it was really beneficial for us.
The company restarted in autumn and through online-only orders was able to rebuild itself. But an estimated 400,000 other small businesses have not been so fortunate.
It's heartbreaking to see these messages of it's after 78 years, we're sad to say that we couldn't do it anymore. And after after 4 generations, we have to close. And so whatever it does take, and if it's the new administration or new policies within the state or whatever it may be, protecting these kind of establishments that are legacies and they're instrumental to the culture of a city, whatever that may be, I do hope that there's help there.
When he's ready to deliver his debut presidential speech to lawmakers, Mr. Biden will likely champion the vaccine rollout, pointing to an increase of deliveries since he took charge. For the last 12 months, Dr. Linnie Edwin's emergency room in Washington, D.C. has been taking in a steady stream of desperately ill COVID-19 patients.
It has been very stressful, and I have 2 little kids at home. My elderly parents are living with me, so I was constantly in fear that I would be bringing this virus home. So this is like the light at the end of a tunnel. So I was ready. I'm ready to get vaccinated.
But Dr. Edwin is among just 6% of Americans who've received both vaccine doses. It'll be many months before a significant proportion of America's almost 330 million population is inoculated. On foreign policy, the president will promote his multilateral approach, gathering allies to stand up to China together, with unlikely any shift in the hardline position against Beijing. But experts expect domestic issues will dominate.
Right now, America's first, second, third, and fourth priorities are all at home. And so I see a president who is going to focus like a laser on the pandemic, on racial injustice, on investments in infrastructure, on investments in green technology, Because if we do not solve these domestic problems, the sources of polarization, we are never going to get our foreign policy right.
The tone of President Biden's address is expected to be very different from his predecessor's last State of the Union.
The days of our country being used, taken advantage of, and even scorned by other nations are long behind us.
The reality TV-style speech last February featured a surprise scholarship, an unexpected Medal of Freedom, and a serviceman brought home early from Afghanistan.
That symbolic candlelighting of 500 candles is what Joe Biden is all about. Unity, commemoration, and honoring. And so I think that's how you'll see whatever symbols he uses during that speech, those will be the symbols, the kind of symbols that he will want Americans to see.
President Biden has repeatedly promised unity. Recent polls suggest Americans believe the country remains deeply divided. But despite the divisions and the different viewpoints, at heart, most Americans just want the same things. Good health, the chance to work, the ability to send their kids to school, all things which in normal times wouldn't be asking too much. But of course, Joe Biden isn't starting his presidency during normal times. And that may be his greatest challenge, not just in this speech, but in the months ahead, proving he can be an effective president in very abnormal times.